Now got it up 2 places here, but well, I'm sure we can survive. Okay, so this one's clean water and sanitation. Number 6. We've done 1 to 5 and a couple of others, and the plan is just to crack on through each one once a month. So that's its heading. And it's got, what, 5 different sections: safe drinking water for all, sanitation for all, better water quality, more efficient water use, integrated water management, healthier ecosystems, international cooperation, and more local participation. I'm not going to go further than that because obviously, as you know, it all splits down into lots of little actions beyond that. But what I did want to do is give you some of the background to where we are in the UK with our day nurseries, according to some recent research that I've looked up. So the first one really is how good our tap water is. So there's no reason for day nurseries in the UK to be buying bottled water in any form when we've got the best quality rating in the world. And in fact, lots of people, when they do sell bottled water, they're selling our tap water in bottles. And then therefore we're just paying for the plastic bottles or for the glass bottles. So given that there's nothing wrong with our tap water, that's really what we should be serving, as long as the tap water is coming directly through the mains and not through tanks in attics and things like that. I had always understood when I lived in London that when you drank water, it had already gone through 8 other bodies before it got kind of recycled to you. That's a complete fallacy, according to Department for Environment. And I'd no idea that actually we don't recycle water for drinking, so it doesn't come through our taps. So that was, I thought, oh, okay, well, that's probably good news. But on the other hand, that means all that tap water is not getting clean. So I'm not entirely sure where it comes from, that they're recycling water, but it's not actually for drinking water. So that was quite strange. But it means we're in this country losing a lot of water. The tap water that we're drinking that is good enough for drinking, we're then not recycling properly, which is okay, but it also means that we shouldn't be wasting our tap water on the plants and things like that, or the toilets, even worse. But in this country, it would be a no-brainer for us to be doing that, and that would then save all our drinking water. So yeah, I don't know about you, but that came as a real shock to me that's what we're doing. And the really bad news is, and again, I knew it was a problem, but I didn't realize how bad of a problem it is, that we're actually really wrecking our underwater aquifers. So under London, for example, we're actually using up the water under London at a completely unsustainable rate. And also a lot of our waters in the rivers we know are in really bad state. Now we know about the rivers because we're seeing water companies pumping sewage into our rivers and onto our beaches and not treating it properly. And if we carry on like this, we're just poisoning the entire country. And I guess our problem is that the public don't really know that is the problem. So we need to share that. I think in England, we think because it rains so much, our water situation is fine, but it's not. As we can tell in the summers when sometimes they say we can't use hose pipes and things like that. It's very different to where I grew up in Hong Kong, where there would be periods when you could only have water for 4 hours a day. And at that point, you'd fill up your baths and things, and that would be it. That's all you've got. And we're kind of spoilt in England because we seem to think that there's just this amazing supply of water from either the rain or under us that we can just carry on using. And we can't carry on doing that, which is quite concerning. But at the moment, there's no real incentive to do much about using less water because the water bills are so low. We just don't pay very much, so we therefore think it's not worth very much, when in fact it is.
It's really difficult though, isn't it, Cheryl, when we get the 2 messages about flooding and drought, and it's quite confusing, isn't it? For the member of the public.
Yeah,
you would think water is, because when it often happens with climate warming, doesn't it? The discussions that members of the public are like, well, I'd like it to be warmer. And then you're like, well, that means it's going to be wetter. And now we've discovered we've actually got a problem with water.
Absolutely, because a lot of the flood waters, of course, it's not something we can drink.
No.
It's often mixed with dirt and everything else, and the sea levels are rising, but that's salt water. You can't drink that unless we desalinate it, which of course is what people in Saudi Arabia, around the Red Sea, in Egypt, they're desalinating the water, which makes their local water more salty. And then we've got all this fresh water coming off the Arctic, where we've got things melting, but that's still going into the seawater. So it's kind of not very much water on the planet is actually drinkable. And that's part of the problem, I'm sure. So this is another really, I found it an interesting statistic. So we do extract all this fresh water. It's for us to use, household use, compared to only 1% for agriculture. So it's not something we can say, oh, well, it's not our fault, it's the people that are feeding the cows. It is actually, British people are using, on average, 150 litres of water per day. And that's a huge amount, whether it's the showers, baths, toilets, dishwashers, washing machine, hoses, and all that sort of stuff. Now, my family, some of them lived in Cape Town, some still do. And their rainfall average is about the same, and yet they only use 50 to 70 litres per day. So less than half what we're using in England. And then I read that the World Wildlife Fund say actually 80 litres per person is entirely possible to achieve now in our homes if they're fitted with modern water efficient appliances. So that led me to think, well, how many litres per person are we using in our day nurseries? And can we compare that so that nurseries can have a look and say, okay, we're using X litres per day in the nursery. How many litres are you using your nursery? Now, can we do that on a per adult member of staff ratio, or do we do that on a per child? But then the children aren't always in, they're in on different days. So I think quite possibly the way to do it is per working member of staff. And that is what our team have started to do, is to work it out per adult. And actually we get through even more water than that. So, the proportion of water we use for our children during the day on a per staff ratio looks to me to be higher than 150 litres of water per day. But Andrew, I know you're on the call. You might want to look at those stats and see what you think. So if the government thinking we're only using 150 litres of water per day in our house, how does that work when we're using out even more in the nurseries? And of course, we do water play and so on extensively. And I'm not proposing we stop it, but it's certainly something we have a look at.
Cheryl, I think when Ivona gave you the stats for water per child, bearing in mind that didn't include then staff.
Yes, that's right.
So you've got to take that into account.
Yes,
that would actually be lower.
So do you think we should just ignore the number of children and do it on the number of staff, which is an indicator of how many children there are on site?
Well, it's difficult because you can't compare it against the average Brit, because you're either comparing it against children, and it's an environment which is a mixture of children and adults, but not the normal household size of children and adult mix. So it's not directly comparable, if I'm honest.
I think this also relates to carbon footprint calculation. If we're going to have a meaningful footprint that includes water,
absolutely.
then we need to have something else. I mean, with OMEP, we've adopted a FTE equivalent child, which is a bit agonising, but at least it works with TOPS, for example. They managed to work out how many equivalent whole equivalent children they have attending, and then base all the metrics on that.
Indeed, I'm just going to move my laptop so it's next to my big screen, so it's like I'm looking at you rather than sideways a bit. Anyway, yes, I mean we've certainly been doing it three ways in terms of electricity and gas, and that is full-time equivalent child, per adult, but also per square meterage of the space that we've taken up. But I think, you know, perhaps this group can come up with a suggestion so we can compare nurseries and preschools with, you know, one of those three, because at the moment we're trying to do all three. And it just, you know, that's quite a lot to do. We don't want to ask other nurseries and preschools to measure it on all three bases. And I think child base were doing it on adults, their carbon footprint. And Bright Horizons were doing it on full-time equivalent children. So it would make sense if we kind of agree with people which one we're going to use. And water, as you say, is part of our. Did you say it's scope? I think it's scope 3. I think that's where we've been putting it, isn't it, Andrew? And I'll come back.
Sorry,
to that.
I'm on mute, so I have to quick put it back on.
Coming off again.
Yeah, water, I think is scope 3, yes.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, definitely something we need to we are looking at, and we are currently offsetting it as well. So we know what our scope 3 is for tops in terms of water, and are already offsetting it so that effectively it's down to 0 on the basis that we don't want to stop our children using water for play. But on the other hand, we've got those pigs and things in the systems to reduce flush use and so on. Slightly different, I'm going to come back to that, but a slightly different issue was the raw sewage pumped into the waterways, which seems to be getting worse in that we're now getting, you know, toxic water off pool, which makes it really tough on children and fish and sea life and everything else. But this has reached problem issues now because people are obviously aware of it and taking this visibly nasty water and kind of evidencing that and complaining. And I think we need to do that. So, you know, if we as adults are seeing raw sewage where the children would be swimming, obviously we've got to act. It's got to be part of our risk assessment when we take children out.
There is I mean, as far as the more general guidance we're giving others, colleagues across the community, there's another issue here. I mean, a lot of the sewage leakage is caused through extreme weather conditions, which are to do with climate change. I've seen reports that suggest that we've got a very aging reservoir system. And in the north of England in particular, there are severe problems with flooding and forecasts where many reservoirs will need to be replaced quite soon if it's not going to cause climate change disasters.
Indeed. And they're Victorian, aren't they? Victorian sewers. And then we've got water companies that are owned by shareholders that want a return, when actually we need to reinvest any profits back into improving the sewers. So yeah, huge problems. And I thought that we were completely self-sufficient in water in this country, and we're not, apparently. We're only 38% self-sufficient in water. And therefore 62% comes from elsewhere. And then I looked for what the examples was. Well, we're importing water from France, for example, bottled water. Volvic and Evian, for examples, are both French waters. But even through our products that we buy, so asparagus and blueberries, for example, that come in from Peru, needed water to produce those. So because we're eating food that's been watered in another country, we're actually importing water from that point of view as well. Now, again, we don't really monitor that, do we? We do have the carbon footprint of food that we use in our catering, but we don't go to this detail to work that one out. So yeah, I think that's really of concern because it's difficult to measure. How do we know how much water there is in blueberries we've imported from Peru? We don't. There is a chart that the government produced that give you rough figures, but we don't break our purchases down into that detail. What we do is have a focus on trying to use locally grown fruit and vegetables. So we're kind of getting around it by trying to say, well, we don't want to be using vegetables and fruit from other countries. We just want to be using local fruit and vegetables. But I know things get through, and I'm not sure to what extent we're able to track that. I mean, Diane might know because she's on the call with, and she's the line manager for Pete, our chef.
So we haven't asked specifically for water. So I must admit that I haven't, because it's not been something we've been requesting, but we find it quite hard sometimes getting, we're able to track and trace some things of the origin, like where it originated from, but how it was processed, or kind of how it was farmed and those sort of things, that's what we're finding tricky with. So to find out the water used to grow those blueberries, for example, I don't know if our supplier would be able to even provide that information.
I'd be very surprised.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to get the carbon footprint
yeah.
of those products that have been grown in Peru, for example, but that carbon footprint would include the water, but it doesn't kind of hide it out for us. So this kind of data, it's just not available for us.
No.
Which does make it really difficult, other than saying, you know, as a blanket thing, well, please let's not import any fruit or vegetables if we can avoid it. But it's largely unavoidable, isn't it? There are some foods that we have to import if we're going to provide a balanced diet to our children, because the British growers have stopped growing some things.
So we tend to go with seasonal fruit and vegetables, and that's what it states on our menus. And we try our hardest to use UK sourced fruit and vegetables. But we did notice the other day, so it was coming into, it was like the winter time, I'm sure it was, that we were getting carrots, so the standard winter kind of root vegetable, and they weren't UK at all. They were actually imported in. You can't select that when you're ordering. You just order carrots because it's a season for carrots, and yeah, they were then imported in. So it's really hard.
It is, and that's with, you know, with the major international food supplier.
Yes.
So you know, if you're going to use your local greengrocer, then I'm not sure it's any easier. Some of them will know where their carrots are from, won't they? If you go into your local farm shop, that's obviously easier, because they can say, yes, these carrots came from the farm up the road.
Yeah.
And that's possible for small nurseries, not so possible for chains where we're centrally buying.
So we do use in the hub section, so we have moved to using local farm, kind of, they're not farm shops, but you can buy from the farm. So we have two definitely, and a third in the workings at the moment, that we can go and source fruits and vegetables that are seasonally produced, because of the situation. It really annoyed Pete with the carrots, just so you know. So kind of he then went and to find out. So we started in Wimborne first. We've got one in Portsmouth now, so we're able to know that firstly they're UK grown, but also they can tell us if it was on their farm or a farm down the road, for example, to kind of go from there. So
yeah, I mean, this is what it's all about, isn't it? Really sustainably sourcing your food and vegetables, but the water element of it, quite challenging.
Absolutely.
I thought this was quite frightening too. I didn't even know there was a national drought group, but there is. And I found this press report. They said they met last week and said that 2050, England will need 4 billion additional litres of water. Now, that is assuming that our population does continue to increase, obviously. But they're saying that we need to act now on water resilience. But again, I don't think that's getting through to people. And people should be concerned, not frightened, but concerned in doing something. And we're not really. But at least we're in a position to start ourselves. As John was saying, particularly up in the East Anglia, Northwest and Yorkshire, but also in our area, we are liable to be hit by flooding. And many of us already have been, or at least it's been close. And we had an incident recently in one of our nurseries in Fawley, in Southampton, where we had to close because there'd been so much rain. The local water board had not been able to provide cleaned water because the dirty water had overflowed into the clean water, and so our water was now not safe. And that was a big shock because it's not specifically in a flood zone, but we actually had to close the nursery because of it and bring in bottled water. So that's that's really beginning to come to home in our nurseries, and never mind the poor nurseries up in in the major flood zones.
One thing that I'm really concerned about in this context is that, you know, whenever we get reporting on flooding, you never see any sign of young children's voices or the impact on them. But it is an incredibly traumatic experience when your home gets ruined and you've got to move out. And maybe we need some way of systematically collecting that to get it into the public attention of the effects on children.
Yes, I agree with you. And even if we can't get it domestically, you know, perhaps we could have made a bit more of what the impact on children was of that flooding in Fawley. I mean, children were not able to come into nursery that day. So the impact was on the children and on the parents who then couldn't go to work that day. So then there's a financial potentially impact on their quality of life. And it was, you know, it was really serious. And that we were only closed like one day, I think. And the water board did kind of make us a very, very small payment as compensation, but none of that got to the children. That was because we had to close for the day, and if you're closed, you can't charge parents. So yeah, we do need to do that, but I'm not sure what the mechanism for doing that. You know, because going and videoing a child and asking their, you know, how they feel about not being able to go into nursery or it's quite kind of intrusive and almost, you know, it's like being an ambulance follower, isn't it? So to get the balance where people actually realize that there is an impact on children without actually further impacting on the children and families is a challenge. But maybe we do need to be a bit more opportunistic about grabbing that evidence when it happens. And this was the point, Sam, that you were saying, you know, only 0.5% of water on Earth is usable and available fresh water. And I saw this in New Zealand recently, that the ice glaciers over southern New Zealand, which have been you know, there for thousands of years, are now melting away and never being replaced. That mountain snow and ice. So it's not just, you know, in north of Iceland on the caps, the North Pole and so on, that the ice is beginning to melt. It's everywhere. I had a friend who'd come back from skiing last week, one of our builders, and he said they were lucky there was actually a snow dump, but actually there was nothing like the amount of snow over the Alps that there has been. And this is just going to get worse. I heard today that we're up on 1.6 degrees above the industrial ages now. So I know we were all fearful about reaching 1.5. We're there. So yeah, it's coming now. This was a definition I'd not seen before until I did a bit of research: green water, blue water, and grey water. I mean, grey water is something that we looked at for our offices to see if it was worth installing grey water when we were refitting it. And it was totally price prohibitive. We couldn't get even a return over 30 years, never mind, you know, 10 or 5. But we are using grey water for the laundry hub. And we should really be using grey water for flushing toilets, and the technology is there. It's just so expensive, it's not worth it when you can just buy water, you know, drinkable water, and flush your toilets with in this country. So we need the government to step in, or the water companies to step in, to make it worthwhile. Otherwise, it's just, you know, anyone that's got cost as a bottom line as part of their thing is not going to do it. So blue water, water taken from a body of water or groundwater to grow a crop. And of course, we're using it in our day nurseries and homes. And then green water, the rainwater stored in soil and then dispersed, leaked, or used by plants. So we're not really accessing it, but we are through our asparagus, for example, if we're buying asparagus. So maybe it's helpful to define which type of water we're talking about. So how about us? Well, at TOPS, as we said earlier, our water is metered, but I put a question mark in that because it's really difficult to get a meter reading monthly. In fact, it's not really practical because the water meters are generally underground, and you've got to lift up really heavy manhole covers and then get yourself down in the dirt to read the covers. So we can't expect our nursery staff to do that. And the water board only read it once. Well, I heard it was once a year, but when I looked at our readings, some of them hadn't been read since 2020. So we've got a bit of an issue with getting our water metered, and then they bill you on estimates. We still do monitor them quite closely because, for example, in Wareham a year or so ago, we had a spike in our water bill, which had been read on a meter, and it turned out we had a leak. And I know leaks are a major problem, and can really give you massive bills. So you do have to monitor them for that, and that's good.
This is a huge problem for smaller settings, preschools, playgroups, and an awful lot of institutions in preschool education find it very difficult to monitor energy use or water supply.
Absolutely.
And I think the only solution that I've come across, and this was in the trials that we did in Kent, where we tried everything to try to get the data to the attention of the children and the parents.
Yeah.
But in the end, what we did was to put up a notice board with those figures on them, so that somebody got the bill and actually put a proxy figure or indication of the consumption on a notice board on a regular basis. And I think that's probably the best we can do in terms of guidance, is to go with something like that.
Yeah.
There's just such a big variety of facilities out there, or access.
And it might be that the bronze level is that you're just asking. You know, and it's only when you get up to gold that you actually know at least what your annual water bill is, because obviously you should know your annual water bill. And then there should be something in there about going back to your water suppliers and evidencing, you know, the request for your water bill.
Many early years providers don't have access to that information because it's a donor, a church, or another organisation altogether that provides the accommodation.
That's right. I mean, we've got a couple of nurseries in churches owned by other people, but also we've got buildings owned by the hospitals. But we ask them. So, you know, can you give us a copy of the water bill? And sometimes they'll help you with that, and sometimes they won't. I mean, notably, the MOD were very unhelpful with giving us bills. You know, trying to get our electricity bill off the MOD was you know, really, really difficult. You think that they've got a declared interest in being sustainable, but in practice, it didn't follow through. But I think, you know, again, from our point of view, I think from OMEP's point of view, we just need to evidence that we're asking. It's a bit like evidencing we're speaking to our suppliers. It doesn't necessarily mean we get action, but they all say, look, if you don't ask, we don't know you're interested.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to keep asking. If you do get your water bill, I did actually look up what the formula is, and that's it. You times your bill in cubic meters by 0.177 to translate it into kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent. Or if your bill is in litres, then you times it by 176. But you have to multiply it up to million litres first.
On the GECO website?
If not, it will be. Yeah, this website for the government publications to how to do your conversions is already there. It's the same chart that you use for translating waste, electricity, and gas, and they do update it. So this is the 23 calculation. So it's relatively straightforward. Obviously, if you're a nursery nurse who doesn't have GCSE maths, impossible. But if you are the person that does the nursery accounts, then it's pretty easy. It's just a straightforward calculation from the bill. And I know our team now have it pretty much automated. They just plug in the bill, and then the calculation is already on the spreadsheet. Is that right, Andrew? I know they're whizzes at it.
Yeah,
and it just,
that's right.
Yeah, and it just makes sense that whoever is paying your bills should have the numerical skills to be able to do this actually relatively easily. It's just if you've got the bill or not that's the issue there. And then as we referred to earlier, how can we compare our nurseries one to another and say, well, look, you guys are using a huge amount of water, what's going on? And yet this other nursery, you're hardly using any, what's going on? And not with a kind of punitive head on at all, just as a type of, okay, well, that's interesting. Is there something that we are doing that you know, that we could improve? And one of the examples we had was a dripping tap or a dripping overflow can actually use an enormous amount of water because it's doing it 24/7, not just, you know, maybe the 3 hours or the 6 hours or the 12 hours that you're in nursery. It's doing it 24/7. So it's all about getting those drips reported to maintenance and getting them acted on. And I mean, we had one nursery where the drip wasn't visible. It was behind the toilet into the floor. So it was actually causing an enormous amount of damage, as well as water use. So there is an incentive for getting reporting systems working. And again, you could have that as one of the standards. You know, what is your process for reporting drips or lights being left on that should have turned themselves off, for example, and processing that. Now we have a system called Alto, which is software, where you can report your, you know, your issues, whether it's a dripping tap or a blocked drain or a, you know, very wet wall for no apparent reason, so that it can be investigated. And that, again, you could have a progression. You know, at bronze you should be noting these, you know, and at silver you should be getting some action, and in gold your water use should be below X potentially. It is really complicated, and we've got a nursery in Wimborne where the catering hub lives, and we've got a nursery in Bearwood where the laundry hub lives. So obviously their water bills are, you know, out of sync, and there is not a separate water meter for the nursery compared to the hubs. So that does pose a challenge, because you can't then directly compare one nursery against another nursery because of all that extra water use. So in an ideal world, you would have your catering hubs, because the catering hub delivers food to 12 different nurseries. And obviously they use a lot of water. So, and they're not on a separate water meter because there's one water meter for the entire site. So that does make a complication, and you'd have to kind of estimate what the catering hubs or the laundry hub was using and take it off. And you can do that actually with a laundry hub, because you know how much water the washing machine's meant to be using. Of course, whether it does use what it's meant to be used or not is, you know, you'd have to evidence that somehow. And that's something that if you could get a university student or whatever to come in and do a project on how much water the washing machine is actually using compared to how much it's supposed to use, that could be really interesting and very relevant for us, where we are laundering nappies and getting through quite a lot of water, even if you're using an eco setting to do it with. So there's a lot of data there that we could use before we can actually make improvements. You kind of need to do the research first and have the numbers, then act and see if it's made any difference. And quite often there'll be lots of different acts. You know, you might be talking, well, we change our bamboo nappies to hemp nappies, or which program do you use is a bit more straightforward. But there's quite a lot there that doesn't make it very easy. So I just wanted to throw it out there. I mean, how do we think we can reduce our water in the nurseries, assuming we want to? Anyone got any suggestions before I flick my slide up with some of the ones I've looked up?
So what we've done in the past in the nurseries is we've made our own, I call them water hippos because that's what they used to be called. So indeed, we've made our own water hippos, which are just basically the pint milk with stones in to basically fill up the cistern. And some water companies give those away free. We've also contacted water companies that provides water, and that you can choose like 2 free things on there. So if they've had showers, they've got the shower nozzle, which I think just it doesn't restrict water, but it uses less water on them. So we tend to have those on the shower heads. Not so much on the sluices, actually. It's just got me thinking. I don't think we've done that for the sluices, but we could do that for this. That's something that could happen as I'm talking about it. So they're the things we tend to, and obviously water butts. We use the water butts to collect the rainwater to water flowers and stuff. So they're the main things we've been doing in the settings.
Absolutely.
It's a really good context for teaching conservation. So it's getting the children to have the habits of turning taps off. Even water butt taps are quite important. and finding conservation opportunities. I think I agree with you. Water play, it'd be tragic to do away or to reduce water play. It's so important, I think. But
a nice
we need to conserve it. We need to make sure it's not wasted.
Exactly. Well, I think you've got all of them pretty much that I got up. Maybe one.
Cheryl, I did send you an email that we did at the. Oh, did you get that?
I didn't get around to opening it before I did this.
Oh,
I'm really sorry, but I bet you've got a whole load of stuff on that.
There is quite a lot on there. Yeah, there's quite a lot of information that we did as part of the training team meeting. Yeah,
because you put your brains to it as well. So I really need to integrate this into what you guys have come up with as well. You don't happen to have it to hand, do you?
Have a quick look.
So these are the ones that I'm pretty sure we're doing already. Some of them we could do better. We've got some taps that automatically turn themselves off. Sometimes they work well, sometimes they don't. It doesn't actually teach the children to turn the taps off by using them. So that's kind of a downside. But on the other hand, it at least stops a tap being let to run for an hour or more if staff aren't in and out of that particular toilet. And actually, it's not just children that leave taps on. It's apprentices and adults also do. And for them, maybe an automatic turn off. And that's what you get in most public toilets now, isn't it? The tap's
washing
only
machines.
on. Yeah. Oh, yes. Washing machines should go on there. Absolutely. So we can have.
There's a huge difference between a good one and a bad one in terms of what
it's absolutely huge, and even the program that you choose as well. So definitely washing machines should go on there. But I think the rest you covered up. The last one, maybe not. Plants that don't need a massive amount of water in the garden. If you go to the Caribbean or somewhere, they have grass, but they don't have the same grass we have. They have much broader leaf grass that apparently needs less water and is tougher. And I think that's something that we can learn from, is we can, if we think our nurseries are in drought areas, then potentially have plants that survive drought. Of course, being in England, it might be drought one month, and it might be a flood the next. So, so it's not that straightforward, sadly. But yes, so yeah, I can definitely add the washing machines on. I'm sure there's others as well that we can do, and using more grey water, for example. So we've got water butts. Some of them are just like open lidded, but if we can gather more of the water off the roof, that would make more sense. And there are practical issues to that, because if you've got a main butt that could be in the front garden, then that's not a secure area for the children to access, and therefore maybe doesn't get used as much. So there's certainly practicalities. And I remember one nursery we ordered water butts for. They simply couldn't put them in the back garden without restricting the children's play space too much, or their access through gates and doors and things like that. So it's not always that easy. So you can't make it mandatory for a nursery to have a water butt in their garden, because they can't all have one.
You can use things like buckets though, Cheryl, and they can collect water in buckets and pots and use that for water in the garden if they can't have water butts in there.
Yes, absolutely right. When it rains, and they can even measure how much rain comes in, with a stick or something. So
the problem we have with that, I'm just thinking of the operational aspect of this, and quality aspect, that if you have got that, health and safety basically penalise you because it's stagnant water in a bucket, and also Ofsted will penalise you for stagnant water in a bucket because you haven't turned them over. So what staff will do is they'll have buckets and pots that are filled with water. They go out and do the garden checks and they tip them all out because it's been drilled
into them inadequate.
Because they'll drill into them, they're no longer compliant with you. So actually, that is a really hard one. The water butt is a safe, kind of measured option for them to be able to conserve
with a lid on it that's secure, so a child can't climb in it.
Yes. So, but with having the pots and stuff, sadly, even if we then said, oh, we're doing conservation of water, those sort of things, it's going to be unlikely that an Ofsted inspector would actually take that as a comment. And I know that's me being a bit negative regarding Ofsted, but I've met a few inspectors recently that would not have accepted that as a valuable answer.
Indeed. Same problem with ponds. You know, if you have a
Yes.
pond in a nursery garden, that's instantly your drowning hazard.
Yes.
And it instantly needs a fence around it and planks, you know, and grid over the top. And then your nice cheap £100 pond is suddenly £3,000 worth because of all the protection you've got to put around it when the children aren't actually in the garden, just in case one escapes and falls in and drowns.
And you can't then access the pond for the intention you had to basically look at ecosystems and kind of wildlife that, it's
no ponds in back gardens of nurseries. It's just impossible to police, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which means you're reliant on visiting ponds when you're out and about, and they're more closely supervised. But yeah, that is the problem with buckets. And we've got into trouble with that before over the last 30 odd years. We have been, you get an inadequate, quick as blink, by having one bucket with stagnant water in the garden. Horrendous.
Because what if they drink it? That's what they say. What if they drink it?
Yeah, what if they trip over and put their head in it and drown in it?
That's what, and you can't do inspections on what ifs. You do all of that questioning. We've got rulers and measurers. There's it's an open bucket, and it's
open got water. Bucket, 2 inches of water. They can drown in it apparently,
and it's stagnant because it's sat.
Yeah. So that's.
I know, Kelly. It was a great idea, but sadly,
not very practical.
If it's directly supervised. Yeah.
This isn't very practical in a UK context, but I saw a lovely example in an Australian nursery where parents had come in and dug a big hole and put a tank under the play area.
Yeah.
For the captured water, recycled water, and they had a Oxfam hand pump on it, so the children could pump out their water for board play.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
We've got some of those within the settings that we have them up high, and they're connected to the guttering, and it's got a aeration system in it, so it's then not stagnant. So we have to then fill. I know. So they fill it up because they'll be playing with it, and the children pump it through, and it comes through this aeration system to basically make it proper water they can kind of play with, and they absolutely adore it, and it recycles back up, so it pumps it back through again. So that's a pool, which it was just very expensive to build, but it's brilliant. But yeah, they love that.
That's great, really good example. Yeah, we specifically are not allowed to play with the water from the water buckets. We're only allowed for the children to use it to water the plants, and if they do play, get their hands in it, then they have to go and wash their hands.
Yes,
with a tippy tap.
With a tippy tap, with the kiddie sinks and antibacterial soap, which we don't use. It's just, honestly, it's mental. Yeah.
There's always obstacles and challenges, isn't there? And everything you try and do.
Yeah. But at least we're talking about it and trying stuff. I think that's the way forward. Slightly different question here. Which nurseries do we think might be vulnerable to flooding? I mean, we didn't think Fawley was vulnerable, and we did think Southsea was vulnerable in Portsmouth because it's low down, it's below sea level, but actually the Southsea flood defences are so good that it's not actually a flood risk. And I just wanted to put this kind of mitigation adaptation thing up, because mitigating and adapting is, I think, the way to go. As in, what can we do to protect them from flooding, and then what do we do to adapt? They're two very different questions. So whenever we look at these risks,
I do think resilience should be added to that, though.
Resilience is resilience mitigating and adapting, or something different again?
No, I think it's something again. I think it's another issue, and it's if you go to a Japanese nursery, every child's got their hard hat ready for the next earthquake. We don't even do fire drills with most young children in this country.
Oh, we do. We do fire drills once a month. Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, you could call that an adaptation. If you're in an earthquake area, then what do? Something drop. I should know. I've just come back from New Zealand, and all children do an earthquake drill. And it's about drop. I can't remember. I'm being stupid here, but I know they had to move under a door frame, and then drop down to the ground. There were three things.
And in the USA, they do it for shooters.
Yeah. So we do intruder drills as well, and it's stay low, crawl to an enclosed space.
Yeah.
So
I think that I would count that as an adaptation for the particular area we're in. Anything else though, John, that in resilience that couldn't be an adaptation or a mitigation?
Well, I think we're talking about every emergency, every emergency, and I think the way I see it is that it's different in as much as we're actually trying to build in the child's agency and their capability of dealing with emergencies, and that will have knock-on effects to family emergencies, death of a close family relative, or there are so many areas that children need resilience for that happen to them all the time. Divorce, so many things, and they're all connected in terms of trauma and well-being, mindfulness, if you like.
Yeah, it sounds silly, like because I'm a military child, so just on that resilience side of things, and Kelly may have this as well. She lived on an army barracks. You used to practice within the schools that were on the military barracks, like bomb alerts and stuff. So we'd basically have a siren go, and you knew that was the bomb siren, and you basically would go and take cover to wherever you needed to do, but you weren't scared, you just did it, kind of like the fire drill. You just went along and did that. And like the amount of times I used to have people come onto the army barracks and be petrified because the people on the gates would have proper machine guns on them. Do you know what I mean? So kind of it's what you come desensitized to. So like the fire drills and those sort of things. I don't know how you could do a flood one though, to kind of put how could you do like a flood drill? We've got our safe spaces.
I think it's more a matter of educating children about how people deal with that, making it part of their experience of, not being such a big shock.
Yeah. It's a deeper subject is actually teaching resilience. How do you teach resilience? Some of us learn it as we grow up, but a lot of children are not very resilient at all.
We teach resilience all the time. It's scaffolding. It's called education. We hold their hand when they're going to jump off a wall. What's the difference?
Yeah. Okay. But I think we're probably onto a different subject here, talking about teaching resilience. But I agree with you. And it's, I think it's very, very important. Somehow I picked up resilience as a child. I'm really resilient. But other people haven't. So how do we help that? And for me, I guess it was about being as independent as I was. I was allowed to go do stuff, and if I fell off a wall, like empathy. Yeah. So resilience and empathy need to be things that you're introduced to very early, and the only way you really learn is doing it
and seeing it happen.
And seeing it happen. Okay, if I just get back to mitigation from floods. I've got some examples here. So I'm just going to put them up rather than talking about it. But I think what I've missed is the child's part of it. So, for example, I sort of thought, well, to mitigate against floods, you need to have surfacing around the nurseries that actually absorb the water, not concrete that runs it into the building. Tarmac also bad for floods because the water can't go anywhere other than what the lowest point is of the concrete. Of course, whether you want to invest in that to that extent is an issue. But concrete, tarmac, rubber and mats, plastic grass, they're all bad for floods. And the other issue is just being low down, isn't it? At Lymington, for example, our outside area is very low down compared to where the water table is. So actually you need to raise up the grass. So we need to, somehow get more earth on top of the grass and then start again with growing the grass on top of that. We need to raise the levels, raise beds, plant trees, because apparently trees are immensely helpful with controlling water levels, both too much water and not enough water. But too close to the building and they can suck out the water from under the building and then the building moves. which isn't too great. So you need trees in the garden, but not right next to the building. I read a story the other day, actually, of a family that moved into a house and they were getting really bad flooding problems in their basement. And that transpired was because the previous owners, just before they moved, had cut down a tree to make the house more sellable. And that tree had been controlling the water underneath the house. So when they chopped the tree down and the tree didn't then suck up the water, the basement got damp. So you've got to be a little bit careful as to what trees, well, very careful, as to what trees are planted and, you know, what is rescued. And certainly some of our nurseries have got big oak trees around them, and it's, you know, a concern because if there's a bad wind and it blows over, then it could go right across the children or right across the building. On the other hand, if we chop it down, it could damage the whole infrastructure. But so it's certainly something to be looked at. And these are examples of how we can mitigate against flood. But you may well have some more. Anyone got any suggestions? I mean, what do we do with the children? Talk about welly boots and walking through water and things like that? That's actually an adaptation, not a
discuss sandbags. So I know that we've discussed sandbags quite a bit. So and that's a common thing, isn't it, that you see, and the reasons why they use the sandbags. I know that was a conversation. I know my daughter's 9, but actually it was a conversation of on the news why they were using sandbags and they weren't building a brick wall. Yeah. Do you mean like kind of she couldn't? Surely you'd put a wall there and to stop it, but to try and explain that it absorbs the water through.
That's certainly a good activity to do with children, isn't it? Having sandbags and then put sandbags in a circle and then pour water in it.
Yeah.
Or maybe they could play in a stream and block the stream with some sandbags or wood or something like that. And then unblock it again, obviously.
Yeah.
So you could certainly do some activities with the children around.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it would be quite a nice parachute type activity to do it with water and flood prevention. You know, you've got the adult model of countries and towns even putting up flood defences to pass the floods down the coast a few miles.
Yeah. Yes, then the coast gets flooded. But yeah, I agree with you. There's certainly some space there for us to be doing some activities around this when I don't think we are. Even though the adults seeing it on the news, it's kind of extending that to play with the children. I just put the carbon emissions down, obviously, because that's more long term for us, isn't it? So and that's stuff we're working on anyway. And then the adaptation, I mean, the biggest adaptation would be to move the whole nursery, help move the building. People are moving away from the coasts. People are actually having to move country, aren't they? So people are building houses on stilts and all kinds of things. And we're seeing that. I mean, it was in the press again this week with the Isle of Wight, where they're trying to reopen a road where part of the road fell into the sea. So it's, you know, we could talk about repositioning little toys and things like that with the children, but it's also worth us knowing. I mean, these days when you buy a property, your searches reveal whether you're in a floodplain or not. And if we are to take on new nurseries, that's something to look at. Do we really want to take on a nursery in the middle of a floodplain? I mean, the short answer should be no. You know, we need to be looking at buildings that are not in the floodplain. And somewhere along the line, the planners allowed this building in floodplains. It's stupid. But that has happened.
Floodplains they're moving as well. I can remember a conversation, I'm sure it was you, John, that said that when you very first bought your house, it wasn't in a floodplain area, and now it's classed as being in a floodplain area.
Well, it's going to be an island in 2050.
It's going to be an island. That's it. Yeah. So, but that's massive, isn't it? Like, kind of when you bought your house, it wasn't, and now it's going to be an island. So it's going to be a lovely island, especially if you're on your own. I'd love that. But how things change, I suppose, is kind of looking at that, and you can't guess when it's gonna not be in a non-floodplain.
I think maybe we should all, as organisations, be reviewing, you know, periodically, maybe every 5 years, is revisit where the flood warnings are now, because that might it might have changed. So that just needs to be a policy in our risk assessments. We can improve our risk assessment and say we need to revisit this every 5 years. or 3 years, or however many we think. Because things change and you don't know they've changed because no one tells you they've changed. You actually have to go out there and look. And should we be supporting parents to check, or is that just going to put a cat among the pigeons and frighten them? Is it our place to do that, or is that the council's place to do that?
I would say the council, so wouldn't want them to move. But that's
yes,
me.
We don't
that's
want them
me
to move away from the nursery, do we?
That's me with my occupancy hat on, Cheryl. I'm going to be honest.
I get that. It's always, yeah, that's important for our financial sustainability.
Yeah.
So assuming repositioning the nursery is not an option, at least trying to avoid buying new ones that are in or renting new ones, or being asked to run new ones that are in the floodplain might be a good idea. Flood defences, that's certainly something that we could look at. Barriers, walls, thresholds. My brother was he was flooded out. Their whole ground floor was flooded when a river broke its banks. And they certainly were looking at these inflatable things that you can just inflate to bring up, you know, a foot or two above the threshold. Obviously, we want the council to do.
It is always a selfish thing to do, though, because
someone else will get it.
Neighbours.
Yeah. One thing he did do was when he replaced the flooring after the flood, is he put tiling floors down. So that if and when they get flooded again, at least you just have to sweep it down, because the carpets, if you put carpets and rugs down, they'd be ruined. And the other thing they considered was making sure that TVs and things were up, 5 foot up the wall instead of on the ground. Those kinds of things, and how easy is it to move the furniture up to the first floor when they get flooded again, rather than if. So if you are in a flood position, then those are the kinds of things. How quickly can you move downstairs to upstairs? Do you have water bottles upstairs? Because all that flood water is not drinkable. I saw in New Zealand that when they were repairing access roads, they weren't digging down and replacing, they were just piling them up higher. So gradually you've got these roads, that are like dikes in the middle of fields. And we can learn from the Dutch, who are familiar with all that. Bottled water, as we discovered, you have to have when the water company turns the supply off. It means anybody that could be remotely flooded needs to think about having some bottled water, which is generally in plastic. And I think it expires, doesn't it? So it means you've got to replace your bottled water every so often, and not pour it away, but drink it just before. And I remember once when one of the nurseries was snowed in, I could get in because I had snow tires. So in this particular case, it would be 4-wheel drives with high exhaust, so you can get in and out. Well, all these kinds of things are, things that we could think about in terms of adaptation. Whether we'd actually act on them or not, I think would depend on how severe we think the risk is and how budget-wise we can put at it. But we were all busy thinking, oh, this is, years away. I don't think it is. That ice cap is melting as we speak. So this is something we need to start bearing in mind.
I actually had this experience in, must have been the very early 60s in Exeter, before they put in flood prevention schemes. And we had the Army landing craft evacuating people from their houses, and at that time it's a very traumatic experience. Whenever it happens, and it's inevitable that it's going to happen more, and the more we do the flood defensing in one place, the more damage there will be in another, because it's water. It just
moves. I'm wondering if part of our role then is as advocating is actually getting somebody to attend if the council have a meeting on emergency planning, whether that is bombs or droughts or floods or whatever. We could do with seeing our local authorities emergency plan.
And if they have a local person come in and talk to the parents and the children about it.
Yeah, I think that'd be a really useful action to do. And to engage and actually to get, well, what's being done for children if this happens? because that's our role, is representing our children. You know, is there a single line in their emergency action plan that relates to children? And I'd put money on there not being. So and that could be anything from baby milk to, you know, how are we going to, you know, where are the children going to play when their parents are dealing with floods? What are we going to do about that? So that's certainly, I think, something that I'll take away, certainly, is to actually ask, can I see your emergency plan, please, to Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, and the same thing to all the other areas that we're in, and let's see what we can do. That's pretty much all I've got on the kind of water reactions, but I just wanted to put something in to help with people's resilience, because I know that when things are really tough, and you know that's been the case for me recently with the fire, which is another sort of emergency, but if we actually act, it can really, really help, and we can do the little things, and we can do these little things with the children. Do something. So rather than us getting depressed about being flooded out, you know, in X nursery or at home in the future, actually getting ourselves ready for it to an extent can really help. I mean, I've got a friend that's taken this a little bit to extreme, in that he's got kind of a doomsday garage, you know, and he's got his big containers of water, and he's got his ration food, and he's got, you know, big first aid supplies and all that kind of stuff. So he's taken, and I know there are little groups in America who are completely nuts over it, and with their little bunkers and stuff. So I'm not suggesting we go to that extent, but at least we can do stuff, and we can teach children that to do things will help with their mental resilience rather than fretting about it. And this whole getting together, encouraging and supporting each other, again, is really important. I mean, the messages of support that I got with the fire was just amazing, just amazing. And I think, you know, again, we can make sure that we're set up so that if any of our parents are flooded out or our nurseries are flooded out, we are ready with that support. It just needs little messages, and it's been amazing. We know our actions have got to be pragmatic and realistic, and I'm sure Andrew will step in there with the money when I ask him for, you know, if I want £10,000 to put flood defences around a nursery, he'll probably say no. So we need to be realistic about what's affordable, what's achievable, and if we don't do it, what's the impact? You know, it could be that some of our nurseries will be the only place that parents could come to when their house is flooded out, in which case we'll need to be open at the weekend, type of stuff. Or maybe we're low down and can't help. And I would say that we need to follow in the nurseries the adults there and the children's interests in order to prioritise things. So maybe one particular nursery is frightened of floods, another nursery is frightened of droughts, another nursery is frightened of fire, whatever it is, let's focus on those and do something towards those. And as we've alluded to earlier, is we need to advocate for children's futures and get our heads around what we can do for the children in our local communities. And not all of them. We can't do all of them, but we can encourage our regional teams to. So, for example, the team in Plymouth can get the Plymouth emergency plan. The team in Bournemouth can get the Bournemouth emergency plan, and then perhaps discuss it at a regional meeting. And if they find that there's nothing for children, we can write some stuff up and say, look, you haven't mentioned children. This is what we think you need, type of thing.
Some nurseries do have an emergency response for kind of can't remember the actual word it's called, for like large instances. So I know Portsmouth have one, for example, and I know Poole have one that they have kind of, if you know, kind of a massive incident happened, that they would open and house children until it was needed. So I'm not saying that every nursery needs to do that, but if we do see like a nursery that potentially is in that area, that potentially we do need to create a similar plan for that setting.
I think there was a case recently with a car going into a preschool or primary school playground and running over a couple of children. It was incredibly close to the setting down. It caused emergency services to get in there very quickly. Those kind of emergencies can happen anywhere. And there are common things to all of them that need to be done. And I guess every setting should have an emergency plan.
I think they should, and I think
they do have emergency plans. Yeah. So they do have emergency plans as such, like kind of if they, you know, they have safe places that they can kind of go to, and those for like big catastrophic things, or if they can't get back into the building for any reason, and some of them have had to use them because of like one thing or another. But I think for the larger, I suppose, the community stuff that you were just talking about, actually, I don't know whether, yes, looking at the Bournemouth emergency plan, for example, to see those, but actually if a nursery within that emergency plan, that kind of like draw space, maybe that they could have a bit of a focus on what they would do as a setting to support that emergency plan, for, you know, and kind of share that might be something we could do.
And we can learn from COVID. You know, COVID was an emergency at the time, and we very much had to think on our feet. And we did that because we're bloody resilient. But I think if anything you can do to help prepare for those situations, you know, so if we've got one for IT, if all the IT fails, you know, what would we do?
Yeah.
And we do have stuff as a whole organization for floods and for bereavement and things like that. But I think it is worth a revisit, isn't it? You know, to have a scheduled revisit and look at each nursery and then link in with the community as well. So Portsmouth nursery, you're absolutely right, QA hospital, we are, as part of our lease, we had to sign up that we would have an emergency plan. And if there was a crisis, for example, you know, a massive explosion, you know, that caused thousands of people to be injured, that we would keep the nursery open 24/7 if necessary, one way or the other, to support. So of course we would. But actually we don't have that in the Royal Bournemouth lease.
No.
Because we weren't required to. But it would be worth us having that conversation with the people that run Bournemouth Hospital and saying, you know, obviously we would stay open. We would bust a guts to do what we required to do, but it would not be worthwhile us having the conversation so that we can actually put the plan in place as to who they'd call and when and how and so on.
So Portsmouth have to do drills. So they have a regular unprompted phone call telling you critical incident initiated. You have to then put the phone down and follow the critical incident procedure. That's what it's called. And they have to then phone up a number to say we're ready to receive. And then nothing happens. Yeah, because they'll say this is the best, blah, 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 thank you. And they just tick off that we've responded. But like you say, actually, what our Royal, like, so Portsmouth, we understand their expectation in that critical incident. So we understand the expectation they have of us. Yeah. But for Bournemouth, do they understand? Do we understand what the expectation would be? Do you mean, yes, of course we'd bust it out. You're absolutely right. We'd be straight there going, what do you need from us? We'll sort it out. But actually, it might be worth having those conversations with like the hospital settings to say, look, we're here, we're on your site, like kind of, you know, what are your expectations if a critical incident happens? Kind of where, you know, would we fit into any of that? Would we be support? You know, those sort of things to write that up, because we used to have a list of staff and telephone numbers. Yeah. So it happened in the middle of the night, the security could come in and then phone. Yeah, bring them all in so that we could guard the children while the parents worked in A&E. Yeah. So yeah, we could absolutely. Thankfully, touching wood, they've never instigated it. No. Yeah, but our luck at the moment, you never know. So and it was QA that were the ones that helped us get our nursery staff vaccinated first against COVID, whereas the other hospitals didn't bother. And you think, you know, is that to do with the close link? You know, that we support them, but they also support us when there's a crisis. So you know, it's not just one way. So if you had to put a business case for it, you could say, you know, this is two-way. Yeah. But it's extra jobs for our managers who are already hard pressed. You know, I realise that. It wouldn't be something that we could demand, you know, but it would be something we could suggest and support with potentially. And maybe even, you know, where we've already got links with hospital, we could draw on those links to develop it. So I think that as an action plan could be helpful.
I'd certainly argue for something generic, though, that would be applicable to all. I mean, a lot of the things that can happen are, by their very nature, not very predictable. You know, we all know that there are life-threatening hailstorms, but we've never experienced one. But should we be prepared, though? Not for that particular one, but there might be some things we could be prepared for that we would put into action.
Yes. Yes, anything that threatened your environment, whether it's a locust swarm or as you say, bits of ice falling out the sky. Obviously, you know, we just get the children inside, but then we'd have hundreds of parents ringing up saying, "Is my child all right?" So it's kind of getting those messages out in anticipation, isn't it? So as soon as we've got the children out, we send a generic message out to all parents saying, "Your child is safe." To stop the calls.
But it's also like silly things like Facebook. With that, your child is safe, and the Facebook now, if they have. So my cousin lives in New Zealand. They had an earthquake, and it says because there was a catastrophe in that area, he could mark himself as safe, and it basically comes up like Dale Hinton is marked as safe, and so you are calmer. You are like, that's fine.
Phew, I can breathe.
Yeah, because you can't get phone signal during those sort of bits and pieces so you don't know what's happening. So actually, those little things. I know it's social media, but doing stuff like that is important. Yeah, it's important.
Do you remember they introduced the emergency alarm onto phones and people's phones? Perhaps we should have a basic process of what to do should that happen.
Yeah.
Should you get a phone alarm? Because I don't think we've got anything for that. And that would be that generic event where they give you instructions, don't they, on the phone? And where, you know, potentially we could send out an email saying in this area an alert's been received. We're now doing X, Y, and Z. So maybe we should do that, look at that emergency response the government set up and see, you know, if we've primed people to know what to do if that comes through.
I think that's really important. That's a good point. And it's also important for the Aspire learners. You know, we've got all these 17, 18-year-olds coming through who don't know anything potentially. Or they might know loads, depending on what school they've been to, and, you know, they might be able to seriously contribute. But it'd be great to arm them with that. You know, as part of their apprenticeship, they actually talk about emergency responses and what happens when the alarm goes off, because then they might be the ones leading the 65-year-olds who missed that bit.
Well, it will be regional specific, won't it? So, you know, it will. The alarm will sound maybe in one place in TOPS or Aspire, but not in another.
Yes, so we can support them.
We need good communication to support them. Yeah. So I think that is definitely, because that feels like a piece of work that could be, you know, useful across the whole business.
Indeed.
It'd be a good first step.
Yeah, and those generic checklists, you know, we could always put examples of them up.
Yeah.
So if the standalone tiny nurseries, you know, have nothing, at least they can draw on us, which would be fine. Yeah. Okay, well that was the end of my presentation, and yeah, as always with these things, you come up with more stuff while you're talking, don't you? And we've all got some potential actions coming out of that, I think. Okay, good. Anyone else got anything that I'm going to stop the share on that.
On another matter, I wouldn't mind asking people what to share knowledge of what the government's doing right now. I took that call for you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
With the digital hub. And basically all they wanted was our experience. They wanted to know what we were doing and what kinds of things we would find valuable to support what we're doing. But their brief is very, you know, it's not very encouraging. As I understand it, the main thing that they're doing at the moment is and I'm not sure whether they've rolled this up already or not, but there's supposed to be a named person in every school for sustainability or greening. And I don't know whether that's applied to preschools or not, but
no, not yet.
Part of the plan. And then they've got the digital hubs, which they've that's been created to create self-assessment tools. So it's a kind of accreditation model that they're using, I think. They're actually early application partners to the UNESCO Greening Initiative, which hasn't fully reported yet, and we're contributing towards at the moment. But so maybe that's going to have a big influence on the way they're thinking about it. But they're doing these self-assessment tools, a quality assured directory of suitable sustainable courses is something that they're producing, and a directory of quality assured organizations they're producing. Now the UNESCO scheme is complementary with that because it's providing global standards for accreditation of green schools, and we're part of that. But the idea is that they're encouraging state partners to use what's already there, you know, to actually work with systems that are already there, but to create common standards across them. And that's really problematic, of course, for us, because the advisory committees and everything, they're experts are all school people.
Yeah.
and tend to be more environmentalists as well, rather than more broadly sustainability or SDG orientated.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a battle on that. The other platform, that's half of the government's policy as I see it. The other one is these climate ambassadors that they're investing in. That's led by Reading University. And every school, I think, will have this accreditation of these ambassadors. But that doesn't include preschools at all. I know it doesn't. That is just for 5-year-olds and above.
Yeah.
But do you know anything else about, you know, what?
No, none of it seems to refer to preschools. I mean, they were saying that they wanted the children to map their outside space and start recording, you know, the flora and fauna in their outside space. Yeah. And, you know, in a day nursery, the children are not able to map.
The school estates are really very important, I think. And
yeah,
an obvious thing is, I mean, there are schools in all our local areas that have got really nice facilities, and it'd be great for preschools to have access to that. And that's a logical conclusion of their policy. But whether it will happen, it'll depend on whether we demand it or not, probably.
Yeah.
It needs to happen.
Yeah.
The general logic is really important as well, because there seems to be a growing acceptance that the main emphasis for the curriculum for 5-year-olds and above is for the children to be equipped to promote change in the community, in the family.
Right.
So their agency is a really big part of the curriculum model that they've taken on board. And it's one that we haven't wholly adopted in preschools, I don't think.
No, and when all our 4-year-olds go on Friday strike, I wonder what they're like about it then.
I think there are problems obviously involved in that, not least, you know, the climate change anxiety that you could easily use.
Yes, easily.
And that's why we take such a celebratory approach to climate change provision. But
and they don't seem to have said what they want the training providers to do either. You know, just where we've got Kelly on the call, you know, that runs a lot in Aspire. But actually, you know, it might be that we could engage the apprentices to record some of our outside space in terms of flora and fauna. That might even tie in with you know, numeracy if they draw a bit of the garden. And
well, the UNESCO curriculum covers from 5. I mean, the first band is 5 to 8-year-olds, but it goes right up into lifelong learning about adult education as well.
So ours are 16 upwards,
and it defines learning outcomes, which means that I think it's great that they haven't included under 5s, because if they did, they'd have learning outcomes.
Like and we don't want learning outcomes for under 5s.
No.
Poor little mites.
And also that has the implication that it's an add-on. You know, they
should be embedded in everything.
They've ducked the real ambition of integrating it into every subject area of the curriculum.
Yeah, and that's my problem with having ambassadors and, you know, one rep per nursery. It doesn't. We actually tried that 10 years ago.
It's a flawed model.
It doesn't work at all. It works in some nurseries if you've got one particular passionate person who's there for an extended period of time. But when you've got 30% staff turnover, you know, it just doesn't work. You're constantly training the lead instead of training everybody. So yeah, I'm not very keen on that idea. And if we had to say that there was one person, we'd probably just say the nursery manager.
I mean, I suppose there's an opportunity because they've only got half a page on preschools out of 236 pages of curriculum sustainability. There's an opportunity here for us to say, well, we've got something you can put in there.
Yes, and that's very true.
That will make it, you know, it will actually be offering something.
Yes. Perhaps that is what we should be looking at, how we can offer, and we've done that in the past, and they don't listen, but we can try again. And keep trying. You know, I keep saying about they're behind Scotland and they don't pay any attention, but there we go. We'll keep trying, and I think we can do that through what we're doing. Just carry on doing what we're doing, and then just publicise it to them every so often.
There's the opposition, the Labour government policies, and I mean, I don't see much in that either.
No,
I don't know.
In fact, they're the one thing that really worries me about the Labour policies at the moment is that they just seem to think they can throw money at schools, and then the schools can take the 2-year-olds and, you know, and sort them out. Well, you know, actually, we're better at this. If anything, they should be saying, can we have their 5- and 6-year-olds? Because we're bringing up our early years children more resilient, more empathetic, and so on than I think the schools are at the moment. And also, we're more flexible in our opening hours and more individual focused, and more play based than the schools are.
One potential way forward is I was thinking, because there's such a big emphasis on green employment, green jobs.
Yeah.
Then maybe we could get one of the big energy providers, the alternative energy, what are the greener or greenwashed energy providers, to sponsor some materials distribution and publication of something on how we do that with socio-dramatic play more effectively. You know, actually get the children playing out being wildlife, forestry experts, and
absolutely,
you know, all these different roles that are needed in protecting the environment.
Yeah. Do you know what? A nursery educator is a green job.
Yeah.
You could argue actually all teachers are green jobs, as long as they have embedded sustainability in their practice, which that's what Kelly and her team are doing at the moment. It's embedding sustainability in all our apprentices. And there are how many of them at the moment?
Why haven't you got dressing up clothes alongside the policeman and the nurse?
for being teachers, because it's just as you are, aren't you? There's no.
Yeah, but we can get two props and clothes for these roles, I think, which, you know, and children can build pretend solar panel arrays.
Of course they can.
Yeah.
But do they need to wear dungarees to do it?
It'll help. It will help. if they can get the role.
Yes. It'll help.
The concept.
Okay, well, that's something to bear in mind, ops. not just forces and ambulance people and stuff, but people doing green jobs. We'll have to get them some green dungarees.
Right. Okay.
A little helmet, welly boots,
safari jackets, and
and magnifying glasses and stuff. Then they can be our green jobs people.
I'll write that down. We can have a conversation regarding that. That's fine. Yeah. I find it hard getting them to wear wet weather gear, but we can try. It's fine.
It may help.
May help, yeah.
It may help. It may help them if they wear wellies as well, John, in the rain and not moan about their feet being wet. But you know, kind of, I'm not against it. I'm happy to discuss and see how we go. Yes,
this is the way of the future. There are going to be millions of green-based jobs, so we're training our children for the future.
Yes.
My argument is they're all green. They should all jobs should be green. So quite how that works, I don't know. But anyway. Okay, we better call this meeting to close. Thank you ever so much for coming to share this and discuss this.